Welcome to this explainer on the CompTIA A Core 2 exam. Look, if you're laser-focused on knocking the certification out of the park and advancing your IT career, you are exactly where you need to be. Today, we're diving deep into the absolute beast that is the operating systems domain. It's domain 1 of the Core 2 exam, and I know it can feel overwhelming, but don't worry. We're going to break down the complexities of Windows, Mac, Linux, and mobile OS together and pull out the clear, actionable, and highly testable concepts you actually need to pass. So here is our game plan for today. We've got 5 main stops. 1. The OS traffic hop. 2. The Windows ecosystem. 3. Navigating Mac and Linux. 4. The Linux command line. And 5. V15 exam OS updates.
All right, starting us off with part 1, the OS traffic cop.
So what is an operating system really doing under the hood? Think of it as the ultimate traffic cop for your computer. It's that absolutely essential layer of software directing all the crazy, high-speed communication between your physical hardware and the apps you're actually trying to use. It's constantly juggling memory, processing inputs, and handling files. Or, if you're more musically inclined, think of it as a conductor leading a massive orchestra, just making sure the CPU, the memory, and the storage all play together in perfect harmony. And understanding that foundation naturally brings us to a huge hardware limitation you've got to know. As an IT pro, you'll be choosing between 32-bit and 64-bit architectures. And honestly, this entire choice boils down to one simple thing: your RAM limit. A 32-bit operating system is hard-capped at roughly 4 gigabytes of RAM. That's it. So if you're working with a system that has 8, 16, or 32 gigs of RAM, you absolutely have to install a 64-bit OS just to be able to address and use that massive memory space. Now, to organize all that data, operating systems use file systems. It's kind of like a massive library card catalog for your storage drive. For the exam, you need to know the heavy hitters. FAT32 and exFAT, those are your go-tos for maximum cross-device compatibility. NTFS is the strict standard for Windows, ext4 is for Linux, and APFS is the Apple file system. But here is an absolutely crucial golden rule for the test. While basic data files, like your PDFs or JPGs, are usually perfectly fine crossing between different systems, application executables are strictly OS-specific. A Windows.exe file is literally never going to run natively on a Mac or a Linux machine. Which brings us to part 2, mastering the Windows ecosystem. Since Windows is the dominant market player, knowing the exact differences between its editions is pure exam gold. So Windows Home is your baseline consumer level. Sure, it has basic encryption, but it is heavily restricted. Windows Pro is what you really need to care about. Pro is the business standard because it unlocks the big security and admin tools. We're talking full-drive BitLocker encryption to completely guard against hardware theft, and the group policy editor, which lets admins rigorously enforce security rules across the entire machine. But honestly, the biggest reason a business ditches Home for Pro is the networking. We've got 2 fundamental models here: workgroups and domains. A workgroup is totally decentralized, peer-to-peer. It's basically like an apartment block. Everyone manages their own keys, their own locks, and their own security. A domain, on the other hand, is a centralized corporate setup running Active Directory. Think of it like a giant office building where everything is managed by one central security desk in the lobby. And here's the kicker: Windows Home physically cannot join a domain. You have to have Windows Pro or higher to get through the door. Okay, 20. Burn this number into your brain. 20 is the absolute maximum recommended number of computers you should ever string together in a Windows workgroup. Because if a small business scales up beyond that, trying to manage all those individual passwords and shared folders, it turns into a total nightmare. Once you hit that 20 device threshold, it is definitely time to step up to a centralized domain. All right, moving right along to part 3, navigating Mac and Linux. Because to be a well-rounded IT professional, you really can't just know Windows. Every OS has its own specific trade-offs. macOS is famous for this incredible seamless integration, but it's completely proprietary and locked down to Apple hardware. Linux, on the other hand, is the open-source champion. It's free, it's infinitely flexible, and that's exactly why it completely dominates server environments. Then you've got Chrome OS, which is super lightweight and almost entirely browser-based. And for mobile, you've got that classic industry split between Apple's closed-source iOS and Google's open-source Android. But what happens when these completely different worlds have to talk to each other? Say you've got a Linux server, but the rest of the office is running on a Windows network. Enter Samba. Samba is basically the ultimate peacekeeper protocol. You set up Samba on that Linux box, and suddenly it can share folders and printers just like a native Windows server. It bridges the gap and acts as the perfect translator in a hybrid office environment.
Next up, part 4, the Linux command line. I know, everyone's favorite, right?
I know the command line can be a notorious pain point, but let's demystify it right now. Before you even type a single command, you need to know exactly how Linux wakes up. It's a strict 4-step sequential process. First, the physical hardware BIOS or UEFI fires up. That hands the baton to the bootloader. The bootloader then wakes up the kernel, and you can think of the kernel as the CEO of the operating system. It takes charge of the absolute core functions. Finally, the kernel hands off all the background services to a process called System D. Once you're actually booted up, there's a highly testable list of basic commands CompTIA expects you to recognize. You've got ls to list your files and cd to change your directory. When you need to manage security, chmod modifies your file permissions and chown changes who actually owns the file. But the real star of the show here is sudo. Sudo lets you temporarily elevate your privileges for just a single administrative task. It is the absolute best practice for security and is way, way better than permanently logging in as the root administrator. And here is a massive conceptual shift if you're used to fixing Windows. Linux does not have a massive, complicated registry. In Linux, configurations live in super simple text files. And almost all of those critical config files live right inside the /etc directory. So user accounts, they're listed in /etc/password. Encrypted passwords, they're tucked away in /etc/shadow. If you need to fundamentally change how a Linux system behaves, you're almost certainly going to be jumping in and editing a text file. All right, bringing it home with Section 5, V15 Exam OS Updates. Knowing the delta between the old exam and this new V15 update is going to give you a massive test-taking edge. So what exactly did they add to Domain 1? Let's prime our attention here. Well, the exam expects you to support a modern hybrid workforce now, so be ready for questions on modern file systems like ReFS and exFS. You're going to see a big focus on pre-boot security settings, specifically TPM chips and UEFI. You definitely need to know Windows 11 inside and out, and specifically, you need to know that Windows 11 completely dropped all 32-bit CPU support. It is 64-bit only. They also threw in some advanced command line tools to the mix, like Who Am I? Which, well, it does exactly what it sounds like. It just tells you which user account is currently logged in. But honestly, knowing what they dropped is just as important so you don't waste your precious study time. The V15 exam completely ditched legacy Windows command line arguments like xcopy, copy, and shutdown. They also pulled the older X3 Linux file system, and you no longer have to stress about memorizing optical media specifications. So scratch those entirely. Now, to put everything we just talked about into perspective, 28%. Operating systems make up a massive 28% chunk of your entire Core 2 exam score. It is virtually impossible to pass the test without locking this domain down. It's the absolute foundation for everything else, from troubleshooting software issues all the way to enforcing enterprise security protocols. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to challenge you with a quick practical scenario to really test your active recall. Ready? Imagine a Windows PC currently in a workgroup that cannot join the corporate Active Directory network. To fix this, do you install the Samba protocol? Do you upgrade the RAM to 64-bit? Or do you upgrade the OS from Home to Pro? Think back to our apartment versus office building analogy. As you dive back into your Core 2 prep, keep asking yourself, how do all these individual OS rules connect together to build a truly secure enterprise-level network? Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.